What up, everybody? I'm Jędrek, and today I will talk to you about Control 101, which is a video that I've been planning on to do for quite some time now. It might turn into a series. Uh, for now, I don't have any plan to do that, but with a good reception from you, anything is possible, basically. So we'll see. I'm always open to any suggestions you have on my content, and what do you want to see from me, because I'm making this content for you, and I want you to be satisfied with it. Today I want to talk a bit about what are, in my opinion, the most important areas of improvement when trying to learn how to play Control, or even later on, if you're already decent or better than decent, you want to sharpen your skills a bit, and what do you should focus about on. So first of all, I want to have a brief aside on Archetype Masters, so to speak, since I don't really believe in the concept. In my opinion, playing Magic well in general requires a somewhat overlapping skill set, regardless of a deck that you are playing, and an Archetype Master could easily pick up a totally different style of deck in a month or so and play it quite proficiently, given the necessary amount of work, which is obviously true, but I believe that this amount of work is more like a month or so than, like, I don't know, 2 years or a year or whatever. I, I think some people believe in that, actually, that, oh, this person is playing Control for like 10 years, so they're insane. But this is something that if you are good at Magic, you can replicate easily. And I believe like a month, as I've said before. So this Cartesian plane that you can see on a screen is a visualization that I like to use when it comes to analyzing different skills in Magic. So these axes might not be that well described and might not precisely illustrate what I meant by them, but I couldn't find any better terms for them, so I will just explain what I meant. The general axis is basically your ability to play Magic well in a so-called vacuum. So a hypothetical player with max value on this axis will never make any technical mistake, like playing a wrong land, attacking in a wrong spot, playing a spell pre-combat if they don't have to, etc. And the format-specific axis is all about the format knowledge. So it illustrates how well you know the archetypes, the specifics of the matchups, and so forth. Obviously, there are close to no skills that are 0 in one of those categories and X or Y in the other, and it's never clearly one or another. What I was basically trying to achieve by showing you this is that, in my opinion, general skills are longer to learn and takes longer to learn and are more transferable, while format specific skills are somewhat easier to learn, but they are, well, format specific, so you can't always transfer everything that you learned. Some parts are obviously still transferable, like if you learn matchups, for example, Esper versus Blue Red Prowess in Modern, you will know more about playing Control versus Aggro in general, but not everything that you learned is transferable, because, for example, there are some cards that doesn't exist in different format that you are playing, and it influences this particular matchup very much. For example, I don't know, there's a Lava Dart, so your X1 bodies that do stuff are way worse against Lava Darts than they are against, like, I don't know, Red White Burn and Pioneer, because you can actually block with your Satyr Wayfinder or whatever. So yeah, basically the skills that are more on a general than format specific side are skills that are more transferable, in my opinion. And you might not agree with that, but this is just a visualization that I like to use myself, because I think it's kind of neat, and I just like quantifying stuff in general. So now let's talk about those actual, well, skills that I wanted to talk about. And as I've said before, being generally good at Magic is sort of a requirement, in my opinion, basically regardless of what we are playing. And stuff like tactical prowess, for example, sequencing your land drops, and stuff like this is important as well while playing Control, obviously. That being said, I would say that generally The technical ability is a bit more valuable when you are playing proactive decks, while the big picture thinking is more of a control sub skill set, even though you need both skills regardless of the deck, and it's just a matter of what's more important while playing a certain archetype. So the first and arguably most important aspect of playing control is what I mentioned a second ago with a big picture thinking, and it is having a plan, which is, in my opinion, a very broad category, as most categories in Magic skill sets, I guess. And I think that there are three main elements of it that are important to single out and to focus on separately. So the first one is matchup knowledge. Obviously, matchup knowledge is fundamental to knowing how to construct your plan, because without knowing the matchup that you are playing, it's literally impossible to build a well-rounded plan, because how can you do that without knowing what you are up against? And the most important part in a matchup knowledge itself, in my opinion, is realizing how does winning look like in a certain matchup, or what's the winning situation against any given deck that you are playing against. So it might sound like obvious, but actually without it, you won't be able to reverse engineering from the winning situation to the start of the game, and without reverse engineering, you can't really. It will be, maybe not you can't, but it will be way harder for you to decide what decisions are important and what you should do in most spots. So some good examples of the gains you get from reverse engineering this way is whether or not you should kill a mana dork on turn 1 in different matchup. So the very universal adage is that you should always bolt the bird, and it's not true in every single matchup. For example, if you're playing against Heliod, how do you lose against Heliod when you're playing control? Okay, so obviously they will kill you with Heliod and Ballista, but how will they kill you with Heliod and Ballista if you have so many interaction in your deck? Usually they will overpower you on mana and use Ranger Captain of Eos to protect their combo. But how can they overpower you on mana if you are both making 1 land drop per turn? Well, they will accelerate with their dorks, and their important cards are like 3 or 4 mana. Ballista is 4 mana plus 2 mana you need to give it lifelink, so it's 6 mana basically, unless you have some counter shenanigans going on. But at the very least, it's 4 mana because you have to play a 1/1 Ballista and then give it lifelink. So it's at the very least it's 4 mana, and it's important to stun their mana development because of that, so they can't overpower you on mana early on. And let's take a deck that's somewhat similar and was a deck that a lot of people gravitated towards before Heliod, I think, which is a green-white Devoted Druid deck that was popular like a year or so ago. And in that deck, killing a turn 1 mana dork was not very important, because how did they kill you? So they were also killing you with Ballista, but they were making infinite mana or arbitrarily large amount of mana to cast a arbitrarily large Ballista. And how they will achieving this state of the game? They needed to play Devoted Druid and then find Vizier of Remedies. And they could do that as soon as turn 3, and they had to untap with Devoted Druid in place, so that means that turn 2 Devoted Druid was something that you should be concerned about. And a turn 1 Dork didn't really help them doing that, because they could cast turn 2 drop anyways, even if you kill their Dork. And it's not like they had some mana sinks like Collected Company, or okay, they had Finally of Devastation, but the difference between 4 and 5 mana on their part wasn't that important, because they didn't have much of this scaling scaling cards, they only had one ballista usually, or maybe two, but usually one, I think. They didn't have Ranger Captain of EOS most of the time because they had Lurus. So it wasn't that important to keep them off of these dorks as it was to kill Devoted Druid. So most of the time when you had one removal spell, you shouldn't kill the dork because then you didn't have an answer to Druid on turn 2. So basically, as you can see, these are like two somewhat similar decks, and this is a very crucial decision that you will face most of the time you are playing against them, whether or not to kill their one mana play. And even though the decks are kind of similar, the decision is different because of your somewhat intimate knowledge of the matchup. Another example is knowing which modes on your model spells you are using. So, for example, I've been playing a lot of Esper recently, and I would say about 80, 85, maybe 90% of the time you are drawing with Esper Charm, but against Tron, or Green Tron, that is, well, Eldrazi Tron and like Amulet Titan to some extent as well, you should be making them discard somewhat often. And this is something that you learn by learning the matchup and by actually knowing how this matchup plays out. And for example, against Tron as an Esper deck, your goal is to go late, and you can actually just deal with all of their threats in their deck. They usually have like, I don't know, 10, maybe 15 threats they have to deal with, or you have to deal with, and you have more than that interaction. So you can actually literally make them run out of threats. And the important part of this is Esper Charm. So for example, they go for Eye of Ugin, or not Eye of Ugin, Sanctum of Ugin, and they play a Karn Liberated, they sacrifice their Sanctum, and they find Ulamog for the next turn. And if you used your Esper Charm for basically no reason 3 turns earlier to draw 2 cards in their end step, even though you already have your land 4 and 5, you have a counter magic, you have Planeswalker, you just wanted to use your mana, even though it's not what the matchup is about, it's not about mana efficiency. And now you don't have this charm to answer Ulamog, and if you know the matchup, then you will have this card at your disposal. And finally, my last example on this is which threats, either yours or your opponent's, are worth fighting for. So, for example, you are playing against another control deck, and you don't know if you can afford to fight over their Planeswalker, or you don't know whether or not you should fight over Spike Feeder against Heliod, because in general, when you are playing Control in Modern, you don't have to care about Spike Feeder, because Infinite Life can be easily beaten with Teferi, Hero of the Minaria, or Jace the Mind Sculptor. So you should basically not devote any cards towards Spike Feeder unless you can afford to, because you're very far ahead, or because this Spike Feeder is a imminent danger to your life total, because you're at, I don't know, 3 life and they have Spike Feeder plus Heliod, and they can just give it lifelink and just kill you in 2 turns or whatever. So this type of stuff is all because of that. I know all of this because of matchup knowledge, and it's something you can learn from yourself by playing. And I think in general the best way to learn Magic is by playing it. But this type of stuff you can also learn fairly effectively by just consuming content. So if you are the type of person who likes to read or watch a lot of Magic content, this is something that you can definitely pick up in a major part by doing that. So second element of having a plan, in my opinion, that's important to single out is switching roles, which basically means adapting to what's happening. Another example, let's imagine a matchup in which you usually have inevitability, but your opponent have a sideboard plan that you've never seen before. You're not prepared to deal with it, and it trumps your late game. And you have to start pressuring them. So maybe you should take way more risks than usual with your Planeswalkers, and sometimes just play them even though you are not guaranteed to untap with them. Or maybe you have to give up the value from flashing something back with Snapcaster Mage, because you need this 2-1 body in play, because you're playing against Burn, you don't have counterspell, and you have to kill them in like next 2 turns. So you'd rather play the Snapcaster now than wait a turn to opt or Esper Charm or whatever, because you need the pressure on the board right now. So the third part of having a plan that I wanted to mention is coherent deck building, and it's a bit different than matchup knowledge and switching roles, because it does less with actual gameplay and more with your general approach to Magic. And this basically means that you shouldn't judge cards in the vacuum, because vacuum doesn't really exist in Magic. You're always bound to a specific format, which means you are bound to specific set of cards and specific metagames, and you should judge these cards in relation to both the format, obviously, and your other cards. And I think people are somewhat good at judging which cards are good or not in any given format, but they are not also that great at it. The best example is my favorite Teferi Time Raveler, which is right now a poor card in Modern, in my opinion, because it doesn't match up very well against most of the top decks. But it's a card that is generally considered strong in this vacuum that I've mentioned. But you also have to consider in how this card works with your other cards. So even though Teferi is a card you will probably play in decks like Blue-White, not every single time, not in many copies, but you are more incentivized to play this type of cards like Teferi or Narch that partner avails Blue-White, because it's more of a tap-out deck, and Esper is more of a draw-go deck, and Teferi just doesn't really mesh well with all these instant speed cards that you want to play on your opponent end step. And even though these instant speed cards might be less powerful, so to speak, once again, the power of the cards isn't that easily judged, in my opinion, and I would in general say that Archmage's Charm is a better card in Modern than Teferi Hero of Dominaria, even though Teferi Time Raveler, even though Teferi is banned in multiple formats, but its strengths aren't that strong in Modern, and its weaknesses are exacerbated. But if you are playing a card that suits your plan better and they fit the deck better, you will win more because your plan is more coherent. So the other concept that I wanted to talk about is not as important, in my opinion, as to having a plan. I think having a plan is by far the most important stuff. But it's something that's commonly misunderstood by newer players, in my opinion, and this is timing. Because as you are learning to play Magic, I'm sure a lot of you had that experience. You are going through your LGS or whatever, or you're playing with your friends, and you are like, okay, so I want to play control decks, or I've never played control decks, and I watched a lot of streams, or just read a lot of articles, or talked a lot with my friend who's playing control at the FNM every single time, and they, I don't know, 3-1 every single time or whatever, and somebody once told you that just being patient is very important while playing control, and you just stick to it, and you are taking no risks, and you are always waiting so you can protect your planeswalker and sort of stuff like this, because you are learned that, for example, in a control mirror, if you blink first, then you lose. And that's not really true. It is a good baseline, but it's something that you should very quickly grow out of, because it will hurt you in a longer run. And to me, timing is all about balancing patience and jamming, and basically playing for your best odds. The most common example in Modern of this is you are playing against Baron, and you have a cryptic command or other counter spell that you hold against them. You are at, I don't know, 3 life, and you have a planeswalker that you can play. So okay, if you jam a planeswalker and they top deck a burn spell, they will kill you. Let's say it's about, I don't know, 30% of the time, because your planeswalker is usually Jace, and you can fate seal them, and then if they have a burn spell that's lethal on top, you can put it back on the bottom. So they basically need runner spells, so even though their deck is more than 30% burn spells, it's still a valid math, more or less. But yeah, the general concept is that you have to take this risk and you might die, but if you don't jump this Planeswalker now, they will eventually amass enough burn spell in their hands to overpower your defenses, because you are only drawing 1 card per turn, and you can't really tap out ever because they will just kill you in response. So if you didn't tap out in this spot, then you basically can't tap out never, and you will eventually lose the game. And then you will be like, okay, so I haven't drawn something, or I wasn't drawing enough lands, or they drawn very well off the top, but actually the reason that you lost was that you didn't take the risk that was necessary to take. And I think the best way to learn this is just to taking way more risks than you are used to. Sometimes even take a risk in a situation that you are fairly sure that it's not correct to do so, just to get this feel on how much it is about, how much is it worth to take a risk, what's the payoff, what's the cost, and then after you are done taking a lot more risks than usual, you can start to scale back a bit to finally land on this very fine line that you want to be on when managing your jamming and non-jamming situations, I would say. And eventually, similar as with mastering or improving your plan abilities, you will start winning more. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to talk about, and I would say that these two areas are the most important areas to improve when you are playing control specifically. Once again, general magic ability is very important regardless of the deck you are playing, but a lot of people were asking me what's the most important skill when you are playing control, and I think these two groups of skills are something that I would pay the most attention to, and it is important regardless of your level. Like, whether you are just starting playing with control, whether or not you are playing control on and off for a couple of months, or even if you are playing control on a regular basis like I do every single day basically, or a couple of times per week at least, there is still a lot of improvement for me in this area as well, because in general Magic is a very, very hard game with a very, very, very high ceiling. So it's important to just improve in these areas constantly and to work on them, even if you think you are already decent at them, because that's the only way you can improve. So yep, I hope you will learn something from this video, and I'm gonna catch you next time. And bye bye.